we're going to talk a lot about the work that we've done here to improve the habitat here at Dwelly Farm Conservation Area. I'm Emily Merlino. I'm the stewardship manager for North County, and over there in the other orange hat is Tom Ashton. He's on the board of the Worcester County Conservation District, and he is a forester. So he's going to add some discussion about the forest health here, and he did a little reading on our previous forest stewardship plan, so he'll talk a little bit about what the recommendations were, and we'll talk about some of the stuff that's been done here since that last plan 10 years ago. This sign is kind of our roadmap for what we've wanted to do here, and we're taking bites out of this plan and doing different things along the way. We have a few goals. We want to improve native habitat, we want to improve pollinator habitat, American woodcock habitat. There are several challenges that we have here at the property, a lot of invasives that we're managing, and the project will take several years of ongoing stewardship to improve the conditions here. And we're in year 4, so a lot to talk about that we've already done and a lot to talk about that we're going to be doing into the future. The property used to be a dairy farm. It was owned by the Dwelly family. Some family members still actually live at the farm next door. The property was donated to us in the will of a gentleman named David, who unfortunately passed from cancer quite early in life. And he decided to give this land to the land trust to preserve forever.
But this area here, which is the majority of the area you've been treating for Glossy Buckthorn, appears to have initially been the landing area for the timber harvest, and it was probably chosen that way because of good access. There might have been a cart path through here. It was high and dry. It's interesting because it, besides the invasive plant, it did create a unusual, unique to the property early successional habitat type, which a lot of different wildlife and songbirds. This is mentioned in the plan, and it sounds reasonable from my observations on other woodlots, is that the glossy buckthorn has always been here. It's present, in the surrounding community, and it was probably living as a smaller component in the understory. And if you're looking at the long-term stewardship of your property, like the long-term management and resiliency of it, before you open the canopy, and do a larger commercial harvest, you should probably look at treating the invasive plants or have a plan to treat the invasive plants during the harvest. That apparently did not happen here. And this was a perfect point to prove what happened is the glossy buckthorn then moved from the understory, increased in size and density, and became kind of a larger component, enough that during the last plan the forester said that this entire area is a glossy buckthorn stand. So so that's kind of a good learning opportunity. If you're looking at doing any sort of commercial harvesting activity on your property for whatever purpose, whether it's to get understory regeneration or generate income or get better species habitat diversity, whatever, you should always look at treating the invasive plants in the understory first.
Oh, perfect. All right.
See if I can get it out of the ground. That's important.
Go, Tom.
Oh,
Oh, wow.
Glossy buckthorn.
We had a baby.
We are in year 4 of doing invasive species management here, chiefly for glossy buckthorn. Tom has a great example specimen here. So there are some key things to look for when you're looking for glossy buckthorn. The stem has white spots on it.
Almost like cork. They're bumpy.
Yep. Roots are usually red,
Yeah,
so when you start to pull it, you can definitely tell you've pulled the right thing.
and they also have this bright kind of orangey yellow
On the inside.
on the inside when you scratch it. That becomes a little bit more pronounced during the growing season. This is a little orangier. And usually when this plant is dead, this has been killed by their treatment. But these roots, these lateral tiny little side roots, are usually like golden fringe. It is quite attractive underground, I gotta give it that.
And it's kind of pretty above ground too. So it's glossy because the leaves are glossy looking, and it has really pretty purple and red berries at the end of the growing season. Birds actually love to eat it, but it's nutritionally like candy. There's nothing nutrient dense about it.
It's also a diuretic for humans.
I have not experienced that firsthand, and I hope you haven't either.
There's a bunch of different things that invasive plants do that make it harmful to the environment, and so they're all pretty much generally the same. But one of them is that they're growing prolifically during the time of the year that our native plants aren't. So this stays green and has leaves on it into the early fall, so it's able to get...
We had leaves on some up until December because we were out here able to pick it out as the only thing that still had leaves in the forest, which was a benefit when we're trying to remove it because everything else has no leaves. So you look up and you see a leaf and you know, okay, it's Glossy Buckthorn, which helped us find some of the bigger ones that were still out here in December. But yeah, they're the only thing.
And on top of that, it's really attractive to wildlife. Like she said, it's got high sugar content, right? Like it's so birds will eat it and they'll disperse it through their droppings. And it's seed banks, so the seed can live in the soil for many years before it's released. So these are all advantages it has. And on top of that, it grows so prolifically that it completely outcompetes all the native vegetation that we want here, like the white pine. And all of our, other native ground covers, shrubs, viburnums, all that type of stuff.
And it actually, in its different stages of life, is an understory when it's young, but then it can grow as large as a tree. Like, it is a small tree if it's given long enough to grow. So it's really outcompeting a lot of different things throughout its life cycle.
And that's like, right there, an important part of the control strategy for this would be, finding those trees in your woodland, the big ones that are providing those large vectors for spreads, finding the mothers and cutting them back to the stump and treating them. Now, I'm a proponent of, targeted, responsible herbicide application where appropriate. And this is one of the times that it is appropriate.
And as a public organization where the public can come onto this land, you need license to use chemical out here. So we hired a company, Land Stewardship Inc., to do that work for us. So they've mapped out the whole property. They've shown us maps of where the highest density and lowest density of the invasive species are. And then over the last few years, they've come through and done cut stem treatment on the larger plants. So they'll cut it down to the stump and then they'll dab herbicide right on the stump so it's controlled. It's only in that one plant. You're not spraying chemical everywhere. For the smaller plants, they do some foliar spray, so spraying the leaves, but they're very targeted on those specific plants. So again, we're not spreading chemical all over. It's not widespread chemical use. It's specifically targeted to those plants.
Yeah, and with that too, it's important to think about looking at herbicide and how it interacts with our natural systems and our food systems is something that we're just starting to discuss and have an understanding of, and that's very important. But you can't picture herbicide application in this, on this stage is the same as the photographs of Monsanto spraying corn, and that's not the way it is. Like she said, some plants have foliar applications are appropriate, but for the most part, these larger woody plants is really cutting them back and applying it directly to the stump. And sometimes they'll put marker dye in them too, to make sure that you recognize the stumps that have already been cut. So when I was working for the state, that's what we did a lot of. Put them in heavy black plastic trash bags, let them sit outside somewhere in the sun and let them just really punish them for a few days, let them cook, and when they're dried out, throw them in your trash.
So there's a couple different groups of people that work out here. So the company comes out here with a group of 5-ish people. They transect the property, so you'll see some, I don't know if we can see any here, but there are red flags up in some of the trees, and that is them transecting the property. So
Like this?
Yes, exactly. So that is from the company basically gridding the property, and they will walk their grid. And so they usually come out here, if there are big plants, they'll come out here with some chainsaws, or they'll come out here with their sprayer backpacks if they're doing foliar spray, and they'll walk their grids. And there's usually about a team of 5 that comes out and does that. But the hand pulling is a totally different thing. So hand pulling is what the land trust is doing to supplement what the company is doing for invasive plant management. So we come out here with volunteers. Usually I can wrangle 6 to 8 volunteers to come do this for an afternoon. And we'll come out and pick an area to start working in. we'll pull all of the small plants that we see. If we find some that are, maybe the size of a quarter or smaller, we have these really big root wrenches.
Yeah, weed wrench.
Yeah,
They're
and
wonderful.
those are really fun, and
I
people
have
like
one.
using them. But so we can do small specimen hand pulling, and then we can do a little bit bigger with the weed wrenches. But if we can get, about 8 people out here, it's usually a good size group to spread out in one general area and do some hand pulling.
Another important thing too is if you're focusing on your property and removing buckthorn, getting your neighbors in your immediate surrounding area on board with you, that's going to make you more successful, right? Actually, that's mentioned in the old plan here, is that you guys should be partnering with people in the community because
that is something that we have started to do. So I mentioned the previous landowner's family lives in the farm that abuts us on that side. They have a lot of glossy buckthorn in their field just over the stone wall. So not a very secure barrier for us from their glossy buckthorn. So that is one thing that we've talked to them about. We can't legally let the applicators treat their property, but we are able to go cut at least what they have, so it will prevent it from creating berries for at least a temporary amount of time.
That being said too, like what you just said, if you have an open area that you can mow, repeated cutting or brush hogging of this plant is a good control strategy too. Especially if you're able to kind of sacrifice a little bit about the pollinator habitat in the short term of the field you're doing, right? And you mow twice. So if you mow during the growing season, and then if you mow again during the fall, October around Columbus Day, you'll be hitting the plant twice and hitting both of its growth twice. So that's another kind of lower impact strategy for managing woody plants in the field, this being one of them.
The pink flags are bare root plants that we purchased from the Worcester County Conservation District last year and the year before that we've been planting throughout the property. We've had, I would say probably a 50-50 success rate with them fully establishing here.
What kind of plants are they?
We've done a whole bunch of different ones. Around this area, I know that there's some meadow rose and some hazelnut. Yep. But yeah, we will plant the bare root in pots and leave them at our office over the summer and then plant them out here in the fall. Survival seems to be a bit of an equation with how much rain we get, because once it's out here, we can't really water it. We don't have a source of water out here. So this has actually been a huge component of the habitat management and improvement projects we've been doing here. When we started working on the project of improving the habitat here, this whole field, which was a field for dairy cow grazing before when it was a dairy farm, had grown back up into really poor pine trees that they were all, about this big, and they were all crowded together, really, really poor growth, no real habitat value for anything. So we decided we were going to revert this back to a field, but focus on pollinator habitat. So we had this all cut and stumped, and all of the material was chipped and left over on the corner. The trail around the edge of the field has been lined with those chips, so we kind of found a new purpose for that, and it helps us know where we're supposed to be walking so people can enjoy looking at the field without crushing the plants during the growing season. But we had this all prepped, and then we looked at a bunch of different sources for the best native wildflower plants and grasses to plant. So a couple of the resources that I used were Dr. Jagir's bee ecology plant list. So he basically has this whole list that talks about native plants, what they're hosts for, when they bloom, when they provide nectar, when they provide pollen. And so I went through that list, and this is a very dry field and it gets full sun pretty much. So I kind of cross-referenced that list and made a seed mix for what plants we wanted to have here. And then we had a tractor broadcast seed that plant mix here. So now this is I think this will be summer 4 for this field. It's either summer 3 or summer 4. I think it's summer 4 though. and we've had quite a bit of establishment here. I'm not super happy with establishment in the middle of the field because, as you can kind of see, it's kind of crested. So the center of the field gets the most full sun, and it also is the driest and most compacted. So around the edges where the water kind of flows off, we have a ton of diverse establishment of the stuff that we planted, and I'm super pleased with it. But kind of up in the middle, we have less establishment of stuff that we seeded for. So this spring, we're gonna have some students who are coming out for a volunteer day start a bunch of seedlings, and in the fall, we'll plant them directly in the middle of the field. So hopefully we'll get some better establishment by planting plugs instead of depending on seed. And we have planted some plugs in that corner as well. One of our board members, who's also on the Community Preservation Committee, the last few years has started seedlings for us as well, and we've had volunteers come out and help us plant them out here. So we've been doing a few things out in the field to improve this, but they say generally you shouldn't expect to have full establishment of a pollinator field for 3 to 4 years. Like, it should look pretty ugly up until that point, but finally at the end of last summer it was looking pretty good, so we're really happy with the results here, and we'll keep improving upon it as well. Yeah, so the lupin have been the most prolific, and they're so fun to see. They're really beautiful, but we did plant a lot of other stuff. The list is very long, but there's definitely some golden Alexander, some goldenrods, like several different goldenrods, wood betony, we have wild bergamot, and a bunch of other stuff. And that's actually the reason I created our own seed mix instead of buying a native wildflower seed mix, because when I was looking at what was in those mixes, they weren't really jiving with what the host plants we were hoping to have here were. So it was a little bit more expensive to create our own mix, and it definitely took a lot more effort and research to do that. But I think it was well worth it, because now we know the species that are out here are things that are actually supporting the native insects and therefore the native birds that we're trying to have habitat for here.
So the adelgid is like a tiny little aphid that has piercing mouth parts, and it sucks the sap out of the hemlock needles, and the infection is so great the tree can't rebound, especially after repeated years and repeated degrees of infestation. So the adelgid right now, it came to Massachusetts. It's an invasive plant from overseas.
I see.
It came to Massachusetts in the mid to late 90s, or that's when it was identified. And at the time, there was a lot of doom and gloom said about how it was going to completely, kill all of our hemlock, and that hasn't really happened yet. And part of the reason for that is because if you get 2 or 3 days of really cold temperatures in the wintertime, it kills the bug. So that's kind of been our saving grace. But like this winter is the perfect example of how that doesn't necessarily happen. So you'll see in a lot of hemlock, specifically in Worcester County, you'll see the needles are kind of getting thinner. We're seeing the effects of that bug. There's also another native insect called the hemlock looper that just happened to coincide, its life cycle happened to coincide with the adelgid. 2 years ago through Templeton, Royalston, Warwick area, there were big chunks of just dead hemlock all over the place, and that was because of the hemlock looper mixing with the adelgid. So
unfortunately, there's not really any way to treat it. They don't have a solution for it, so we're kind of just at the mercy of hoping nature figures it out and we keep our hemlocks.
Like I've said a few times, looking at climate and looking at what species are projected to do better here, one of the advisable things is to start looking at removing larger, decent quality hemlock from the overstory when it's still good, when you can still get some value out of it, commercial value, because doing forest stand improvement and doing forestry work and these types of manipulations for the structure and stands of your forest, a lot of the time commercial harvesting is a tool to get that done, start converting this over to something else. Swamp hardwoods, it looks like, wants to grow here.
We are at year 10 of our current forest stewardship plan, so we work with another forester who is going to be redoing our plan for this property. So we'll find out a little bit more of that once he does his walks out here. One thing that we're making sure we're doing with all of our new plans is the state offers additional parts of your plan where you can focus on bird habitat or you can focus on climate resiliency of your forest, and they'll give you specific recommendations for both of those things. So you can choose to do one, both, neither. We're making sure we do both for all of our new plans so that we have all the information we might want. And we just had 2 others done for 2 other properties, and there were recommendations about different tree species we should try to maybe thin out, and maybe things we should plant in the understory. So, but we'll find out more about specifically everything that's here, because they'll again do transect walks and walk pretty much the whole property.